Hello everybody and welcome to a video that is in large part prompted by this video by Pleasant Kenobi. It's called How Much Money Pleasant Kenobi Makes Playing Magic the Gathering on YouTube, and he's basically just talking about how his revenues work and things of that nature, but he ends up talking a lot about how Patreon is one of the main ways he makes money, which led me to the question, how did that affect his Patreon? And I actually found a site that let me see how it affected his Patreon. This video came out right before here. So you see this is September and this is October. This video came out October 12th. So it actually had a massive impact. He gained about, let's say, like 200 patrons from it. No, 300 patrons from it, which is pretty significant. That's a lot of patrons to gain from a video. The video that he was kind of trying to present a counter argument to, not that he was really debating anything, was this one by Covert Go Blue, where he was talking about how much money he makes playing Magic the Gathering. And his Patreon, which is not really his focus, actually went down in the months following that video. This also coincides with Covert Go Blue like ending his streak of daily videos, so that could be a factor. But going from like 350 down to like 250, losing 100 patrons, could also be from the fact that people now know that he's making like $30,000 a month, though obviously that's just this individual month, but making a lot of money each month. So maybe that was the factor. And yeah, so that was one of the things that Vince was talking about in his video was people saw the Covert Go Blue video, they assumed all Magic creators were in a similar boat, and then he was getting messages like, oh, I'm going to stop my Patreon support because you're already making a lot of money. And as we see, he actually kind of got a nice boost, which is great. Covert Go Blue, his went down a little bit, which makes sense. And overall, this just kind of made me wonder, how effective is it when Magic creators talk about their Patreon or talk about the fact that they're struggling or how their revenue works in general? And so I just looked for some other examples that I could potentially find of how the Patreon site works. I mean, honestly, Graphtreon, this website, I was just really interested in it. So I was just looking up a bunch of different stuff about it. And so I thought I would share it with all of you. So the first one I want to look at is probably the most graphic example that I could find. Graphic as in demonstrable, not as in like violent or anything like that. And I'm actually really happy that this happened, but the graphic it's very, very clear. So Tolarian Community College, one of the biggest, or if not the biggest, Magic the Gathering YouTube channel, posted this video in January of 2017. I just lost my job. Can I have $1? So basically, he was a community college professor, and they cut all of the classes that he was teaching out of their curriculum due to budget cuts. And he basically came to YouTube to say, hey, folks, I've been making these videos for you folks. I love making them, but I just lost my normal job, and so I kind of need some extra funds to help just pay for life and help maybe make this channel bigger and do stuff that you folks are enjoying watching. And Brian is just a great figurehead for the community. I'm so glad he's a part of the Magic community. And this video, January 2017, you say? Well, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, straight up. He went from about 1,100 patrons, which is a lot of patrons, straight up to 3,000 patrons. So he tripled his Patreon size, and that's just fantastic to see. I'm really happy to see that, and he deserves it. He's a fantastic creator. He's a pillar of the community. He's such a positive influence, and honestly, I'm really happy to see this. And I think it's so cool to see that someone who just kind of shares their situation honestly and as openly as he was willing to do can actually kind of get the support that he kind of from the community that he has gotten. I think that's really awesome. I think it's really cool that Vince can say, hey guys, Patreon's a huge part of my system here on YouTube, and he gets a nice spike. I think it's great that the professor can say, hey guys, I lost my job. YouTube, can you maybe come in clutch for me? And it just really goes up a ton. It's just so great to see that sort of thing. And another example of this was not him asking for money. He doesn't really even mention the Patreon, but this is just an example of the community kind of coming together behind another figure, Strictly Better MTG. He said he had a heart attack. I watched this whole video. It's basically just him talking about how grateful he is for his YouTube community. He doesn't really mention the Patreon at all. He doesn't ask people to become patrons. He's basically just being grateful and saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe I get to do this every day. I nearly died. It's so fantastic that I can be a part of this community. I realized how much it meant to me, how much everyone has been a part of this journey with me. It's not just me doing it alone. It's me and all of you. And in response to that, his Patreon got a nice little boost as well, 150. 150 might not seem like a lot, but 150 patrons, it can be a big deal. So I'm really happy to see that sort of it's great to see communities kind of rallying around the creators that they enjoy when they kind of better understand how big a part Patreon can play in their lives, or almost, I guess, how big the creator themselves plays in their lives. Because if you're a big fan of his, I don't watch a ton of his videos. I was just, I am aware of him and I've watched some of his videos, obviously. That's how I knew to look for this sort of thing. I didn't watch the video at the time. I was just looking on different sites on Graphtreon, and I was like, oh, there's a spike. I wonder what that was from. And I was like, oh my gosh, he almost died. But it's just very interesting to see how people reevaluate things when they kind of know a little bit more behind the scenes, because it's a very opaque type of business. It's not a very conventional business. And that's just why I think these sorts of things are very interesting, and why I was so curious to look into them. One example that I just want to show off that I think always does a really good job with pretty much everything they do is the Command Zone. And their video came out in 2016, and they coincided it with the start of the Patreon. So they don't have a massive spike, but I just kind of wanted to showcase them as kind of an example of maybe doing things right and doing things like a certain way. They, I think, changed the way their model works at some point here, from a per episode to a per month basis. I'm not sure if that's the cause of the spike. I'm not sure the exact date that they shifted that, but I think they're just a great example of just consistently growing over time. I just honestly love highlighting the Command Zone, even though I don't like really consume their podcast all that often. I do love looking to them for inspiration when it comes to just seeing what they do in terms of just everything, because they're just great example. And I just kind of want to show them as an example of people that kind of launch videos alongside Patreon, as just an example of how that can go versus having a Patreon and then making a video about it afterwards, because they kind of launched it in series, and that was very effective for them. And also, just in case people are curious, the green line is for when people reveal how much they make on Patreon, because you can, if you have a Patreon, you can say how many patrons you have and how much you make on Patreon. And so oftentimes it feels like when they get to a certain threshold, they like to hide the dollar amount, just because you don't want what's happening with the Pleasant Kenobi situation, where this is like really a lot of his revenue, and he just eventually is like, okay, if I keep showing this, people are going to think that I'm making tons of money on everything, when this is really like my full income. So making $1,000 a month, as he was at this 970 part or whatever, is not like a livable wage, and that's like most of his income. And so he just hides it, partially because it's just sometimes too private or things like that. But that's just what the green line is, in case people were curious. Now, one other example that I have of a Patreon being launched is Limited Resources. Marshall Sutcliffe, the hero, the man, the myth, the legend. Everyone loves Limited Resources in the Magic community, or not everyone, but a lot of people do love Limited Resources. He had the Patreon set up before the video, so this is, I think it actually was kind of at the same time. That's the whole reason I made it. So basically, very similar timing. Limited Resources Patreon and Limited Resources Patreon gets kind of launched at the same time. And it's just kind of a similar thing. It kind of reaches a peak, which I think eventually, if your audience isn't consistently growing, you do kind of reach a peak with this sort of thing, where you aren't really expanding your audience and reaching new viewers who would potentially become patrons. And there's generally a subset of your community that is willing to be a patron, that if you're not growing your audience, you're not reaching those new people. And there's natural, like, people that leave, people that rejoin, or people that join. So it's kind of flat for a long time, which is kind of interesting to see, because Magic the Gathering has been getting more and more popular. So seeing this be relatively stagnant is kind of interesting to me. I would think that it would potentially be growing. But there is this noticeable decline here towards the end of 2021 and 2022. And I think that is directly linked to the sponsorship of FTX, because a lot of people don't really support what FTX stands for potentially. This is September of 2021. And I mean, you can look August, September, it just starts declining. And I feel like maybe the new sponsorship has something to do with that. Because the content has still been very, very similar. Like the content itself is not changing. It's pretty much just, that's like a big event. When you see a change in a trend, you kind of want to look for some sort of triggering event. It could just be socioeconomic factors, like people having less money or things like that. But given how flat it was for so long, to then suddenly see this decline, that might just be the factor, which is really interesting to figure out in and of itself. I would never have even thought of that as a thing without Graphtreon. It's just very interesting to me to kind of see these things. Honestly, this whole video is basically just kind of an interesting dive into maybe some of the factors that influence how creators get supported, which I just found very interesting from a personal perspective. So I wanted to share it with all of you, because I did all of this research and stuff. And basically all spawned from this video. I was like, okay, I wonder if I can check how his Patreon changed. Boom, you see that. And then I was like, oh, I wonder how the professor's one changed, because this was like a video that I kind of view as the seminal example of promoting a Patreon as like an essential thing for his business, and it went straight up. Covert Go Blue was another one that was kind of interesting just because he doesn't really focus on Patreon. So I was just interested in that. And then this one was the one I just stumbled onto, because I basically just started typing in all the creators that I could think of that make Magic the Gathering content into this Graphtreon site. And so that was kind of a cool find. And then I just like loved looking at the command zone stuff, limited resources. And then finally, I'll just show my Patreon, because it's just, I actually have all of the knowledge on the ups and downs. And so in case, I'm sure somebody was going to go on Graphtreon and look at me after this, and so I might as well do that for you. So all-time Patreon, like kind of just going up over time, looking at big spikes. A lot of the big spikes come because I'm a relatively small Patreon overall, and whenever somebody supports for a large amount, like whenever I would get a coaching person on Patreon, it would just represent a big spike. So that's what pretty much a lot of these months of like growth are, where it'd be like, okay, I would have like a couple of $2 or $3 patron type, that range, like $2.50, or a couple $5 patrons, lose a couple patrons, and then I would get like a coaching client, and so go up, 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 up. And right around here was when like I kind of capped my coaching thing, because I was I didn't really feel like I had enough time to coach as many people, and so it went down a little bit. And then the spike was I got a new coaching thing or things like that. And this massive spike was when I got a very generous patron who supports for a lot. So yeah, and then you'll notice that I also experimented with hiding the amount that I make on Patreon, just because I was curious. I love testing the data part of things like that, and so I was like, okay, I wonder if I'll get more patrons if I hide the dollar amount. But it's not like a huge secret, because it's literally been public information for like years at this point, and it's not like it's really super hidden. So yeah, this is just kind of how Patreon works in general, and yeah, a lot of these numbers are just pretty interesting to look at. I don't really think mine just has the same spikes. Like obviously, when you are looking at a big sample size of like 1,500 patrons, unlimited resources, getting one big patron is going to move a little bit, but you're not going to see this massive decline unless there's a larger factor. But whereas with mine, when I have like 90 patrons instead of 1,500, one big patron really can swing it. But yeah, this one wasn't supposed to be about me. I just figured somebody was going to search up at my thing after this, because Graphtreon is a cool site, and I just figured that would be cool to kind of show to wrap things up. And speaking of wrapping things up, that is going to wrap things up for the video. If you made it to the end of the video, leave hashtag Graphtreon for the win to let me know you made it all the way to the end, because honestly, I couldn't have done this video without this cool site that I didn't know existed until today. And I honestly think it's just kind of a cool thing to talk about and look at. So yeah, if you are interested in more of my stuff, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you can find links to all of my stuff, including my Patreon, in the description below, though obviously that wasn't really the focus of this video. I was just figured all my Discord servers in the description. The NicolaiBolas Sealed League is going to get running soon, so yeah, it's free to join, all that stuff. But yeah, just some interesting graphs. You can fiddle around with Graphtreon yourself, and I've been blabbing on for quite a while here, so I'm going to call it a video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.